I was sitting in my car outside the 40-second tech company that had rejected me that year when the email came in. Not a phone call. Not a real explanation. Just the same polite corporate nonsense dressed up in clean fonts and fake kindness. Thank you for your time. Delaney. We were impressed with your background. Unfortunately, we have decided to move forward with another candidate. Another candidate? That phrase should be printed on a cheap coffee mug and handed to every qualified person who has ever been quietly buried by people with better connections and worse morals. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then looked through my windshield at the glass building in front of me. Inside that office, less than 2 hours earlier, I had solved their technical assessment in half the expected time. The senior engineer had leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said, "Well, I did not expect that." I almost laughed then. People rarely expected much from me once my last name appeared on a background check. Cross, as in Arthur Cross. CEO of Cross Tech Consulting, as in my father, as in the man who had spent 2 years making sure every door in Silicon Valley closed right before I reached it. I was 26 years old, had a computer science degree, a portfolio strong enough to make recruiters call me first, and a rejection folder so full it needed its own zip code. I had interviewed with startups, major firms, private labs, security companies, cloud companies, companies that made apps nobody asked for, and one company that claimed it was revolutionizing workplace hydration. Whatever that means. Silicon Valley can put a chip in a toaster and call it innovation. Every time. The pattern was the same. Great first call. Strong technical screen. Excellent assessment. Then silence. Then rejection. At first, I blamed the market. Then I blamed my interview style. Then I blamed myself. Because that is what families like mine train you to do. If something goes wrong, start by assuming it is your fault. Saves everyone else time. By that point, I was working night shift IT support at a logistics warehouse in Fremont. The place smelled like cardboard dust, burnt coffee, and printer toner. My job was to keep ancient inventory servers alive, while forklifts beeped through the dark like angry microwave ovens. It was not glamorous, but it paid rent. Barely. My apartment was 450 square feet, which sounds bigger if you say it fast. The kitchen sink was close enough to the bed that I could boil pasta and check my email without standing up. Efficient. In the saddest possible way. That afternoon, sitting outside that tech firm, I did something I had promised myself I would not do again. I called the recruiter. Her name was Marissa, and she had been kind in a careful way. Not warm exactly, but human. In tech hiring, human counts as a luxury feature. She did not answer. So I left a message. "Hi, Marissa. This is Delaney Cross. I just received the decision email. I understand if you cannot share details, but I would really appreciate any feedback. I completed the assessment and thought the interviews went well. Thank you." I hung up and sat there with both hands on the steering wheel. I expected nothing. Nothing had become a familiar answer. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. "Delaney?" Marissa's voice was low. "Yes. I should not be calling you." That woke me up. People only say that when they are about to tell the truth or ask you to join a pyramid scheme. I was hoping for the first one. "I understand," I said. "No. I really should not. This could cost me my job." I sat a little straighter. "Then you do not have to say anything." She was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed. "You passed everything. Your assessment score was the highest in the pool." I closed my eyes. There it was. The little confirmation that hurts worse than doubt. Then why was I rejected? Another pause. Because after the final interview, someone flagged your name through a private executive hiring channel. My fingers tightened around the phone. What kind of flag? A reputational warning. I almost smiled. That sounded so polite. Like someone had put a knife in a gift basket. What did it say? "Delaney? Please." I heard her shift on the other end. Papers moved. A door closed. It said you were involved in intellectual property theft at Cross Tech Consulting. It said you embezzled proprietary architecture from a family-owned corporate system and attempted to sell it under your own name. For a second, the whole parking lot seemed to go still. Not quiet. Still, there is a difference. Quiet means no sound. Still means your body has stopped negotiating with reality. I looked down at my own hands. They were steady, which surprised me. I had always thought that if I finally learned the reason my life kept collapsing, I would shake, maybe cry, maybe scream into the steering wheel like a normal person in a bad movie. Instead, my brain did what it had always done. It organized the information. Private executive hiring channel. Reputational warning. Intellectual property. Theft. Cross-tech consulting. My father, Arthur Cross, had not just let me fail. He had engineered the failure. That was his gift. Really? Some fathers teach their daughters to ride a bike. Mine built invisible fences and called them life lessons. Who submitted it? I asked. Marissa did not answer right away. You already know. I did, but hearing the silence confirm it was still something. Arthur Cross, I said. She exhaled softly. I am sorry. Sorry is a strange word when the damage is that clean. It does not fix anything. But it tells you at least one person saw the body on the floor. Thank you for telling me, I said. Delaney, be careful. That report has been circulating for a while. Not everywhere. But in the rooms that matter. The rooms that matter. Of course, my father had always loved rooms that mattered. Boardrooms. Donor dinners. Founder panels. Private clubs where men in quarter zips pretended they were casual while discussing who deserved a future. Did the report include evidence? I asked. No. Just a statement from Crosstech's legal office and a note that the matter was handled privately to avoid family embarrassment. I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because it was perfect. He had accused me, convicted me, and buried me without even needing proof. All he had to do was sound respectable. In America, that still works more often than people want to admit. I appreciate you taking the risk, I said. I wish I could do more. You already did. When the call ended, I sat in my car until the sun started dropping behind the office park. People came out of the building in small groups, carrying laptops and iced coffees, complaining about meetings, laughing about dinner plans, living inside the kind of ordinary career I had been trying to enter for 2 years. I did not envy them, not exactly. I just wondered what it felt like to fail for normal reasons. That evening, I drove to my parents' house in Palo Alto for the mandatory family dinner. Mandatory was my mother Valerie's word. She used it for family events the way courts use it for subpoenas. If you did not attend, she called it pulling away. If you did attend, she treated you like an unpaid intern at a holiday gathering. The house was lit up when I arrived. Warm windows, trimmed hedges, polished walkway. The kind of house that tells neighbors everything is fine before anyone asks. Inside, my sister Kendall was already at the dining table, scrolling through her phone with one hand and lifting a wine glass with the other. She was 24, beautiful in the expensive, effortless way that usually requires a lot of effort and someone else's credit card. There she is, Kendall said without looking up. How was the interview? My mother glanced at me from the kitchen doorway. Arthur sat at the head of the table. Of course, he always did. Even when dinner had not started. Some men do not sit in chairs. They occupy positions. It went fine, I said. Taking my seat, Arthur smiled. Not kindly. Knowingly? That is good, he said. Though, at some point, Delaney, you may need to adjust your expectations. I unfolded my napkin and placed it on my lap. There are moments in life when screaming would feel good for about 4 seconds and then cost you everything. I had learned that young. Valerie brought out roasted chicken, green beans, and mashed potatoes arranged like we were being photographed for a magazine about emotionally bankrupt families. Arthur waited until everyone had been served. Then he said, I spoke with Kendall today. She could use some administrative help at the office. Kendall finally looked up, smiling like she had just donated to charity. Just basic things, she said. Calendar, emails, maybe organizing my files. Nothing too technical. I stared at her. My father continued. It would be minimum wage to start. But it would get you back around the industry. Back around the industry, like I had wandered away from it. Like I had not been locked out and left banging on the door. That is generous, Valerie added. Your sister is willing to put herself out there for you. Kendall gave a small shrug. Family helps family. That was always the phrase people used right before asking you to accept something insulting with a smile. I picked up my glass of water and took one slow sip. Arthur watched me over the rim of his wine glass. The industry knows you cannot be trusted. Delaney, he said. Surrender to reality. There it was. Not hidden, not hinted. Placed right in the center of the table between the chicken and the green beans. My mother looked down at her plate. Kendall's smile widened just enough to tell me she already knew. I set my glass down carefully. For a moment, I thought about telling them what Marissa had said. I thought about asking my father how long he had been poisoning my name. I thought about asking my mother when she decided silence was easier than honesty. I thought about asking Kendall whether wearing stolen light ever made her feel warm. But some questions are not questions. They are invitations for liars to decorate the room. So I nodded, not because I agreed, because I understood. I will think about it, I said. Arthur looked pleased. Good. Dinner continued. That was the part that still gets me. Not the betrayal, not even the insult. The chicken was passed. Kendall talked about investors. Valerie asked if anyone wanted more potatoes. Arthur discussed market trends, like he had not just admitted to destroying his own daughter's career over roasted poultry. I stayed for another 7 minutes. Long enough to be polite, short enough to keep my self-respect from filing a formal complaint. Then I stood. Valerie blinked. You are leaving already? Yes. Arthur frowned. Delaney? I pushed in my chair. No drama. No raised voice. No tears for them to label unstable later. I have work tonight. Kendall gave a little laugh. At the warehouse? I looked at her. Yes, I said. Some systems still need people who know how to keep them running. Her smile faded first. That was enough for the evening. I walked out through the front door and into the cold air, leaving the warm house behind me. By the time I reached my car, I knew two things with absolute clarity. My father had not made a mistake, and I was no longer trying to be welcomed back into a family that had turned my life into a warning label. I started the engine, drove toward the warehouse, and for the first time in 2 years, I stopped wondering what was wrong with me. The answer was simple. Nothing. The problem had a name, an address, a company logo, and a seat at the head of my parents' dining table. The warehouse looked almost peaceful at midnight, which is not something anybody with a healthy social life should ever say. I pulled into the employee lot behind a row of delivery trucks and sat there for a minute with both hands still on the steering wheel. My parents' house was only 20 miles behind me, but it felt like I had driven out of one life and into another. Not a better one, just one where nobody was pretending. Inside the warehouse, nobody cared that I was Arthur Cross's daughter. Nobody cared that Kendall Cross was supposedly the future queen of tech. Nobody asked why a woman with my resume was resetting password tokens for shipping coordinators at 2 in the morning. They just wanted the scanner system to stop freezing. Honestly, there was comfort in that. A broken server does not gaslight you. It does not call you ungrateful. It does not invite you to dinner and offer you minimum wage as a spiritual growth opportunity. A broken server has the decency to be obvious. I clocked in, dropped my backpack under the desk, and checked the overnight ticket queue. 2 printer errors. 1 inventory sync failure. 1 forklift tablet that refused to connect to Wi-Fi. And a note from the day manager that said, "Please do not reboot Server 3 unless absolutely necessary." Server 3 had been absolutely necessary since the Obama administration. But nobody asked me. I made coffee from the break room machine, which produced a liquid that technically met the legal definition of warm. Then I settled into the small IT office near the backloading dock. That office was barely bigger than a walk-in closet. It had a metal desk, 2 monitors, a rack of humming equipment, and 1 chair with a left wheel that gave up every time I leaned too far back. Luxury. Basically, for the next few hours, I worked through the queue. I cleared the sync failure, reset the tablet, fixed the printer by removing a label someone had somehow jammed into a place no label should ever visit. By around 3 in the morning, the warehouse had gone quiet except for the server fans and the distant rumble of trucks being loaded outside. That was the hour when everything felt stripped down. No meetings, no fake smiles, no family performance. Just machines, error logs, and the occasional raccoon doing suspicious things near the dumpsters. I was reviewing a backup report when someone knocked on the IT office door. Nobody knocked at 3 in the morning unless something had broken badly or someone was lost. I looked up. A man in a dark courier jacket stood outside the glass panel, holding a clipboard and a square metal case with both hands. He looked too awake for that hour, which immediately made me distrust him. I opened the door halfway. "Delaney Cross?" he asked. I did not answer right away. At 3 in the morning, in a warehouse. When a stranger says your full name, you do not start with trust. You start with exits. "Who is asking?" He held up a badge. "Certified courier. I have a secure estate delivery. Signature required." "Estate delivery?" "Yes." "Ma'am?" That word, ma'am, at my age, should have offended me. But at 3 in the morning, holding a paper cup of warehouse coffee, I probably had the energy of a divorced tax attorney. "From whose estate?" He checked the label. "Josephine Whitaker." My hand tightened on the door. Grandma Josephine. My father's mother. The only person in my family who had ever looked at me like I was a person instead of a problem to manage. She had been dead for 3 years. I opened the door the rest of the way. The courier placed the metal case on my desk with care. It was not huge. Maybe the size of a small microwave. But it landed with a heavy, serious sound. Not a decorative box. A lockbox. Fireproof. Reinforced corners. Double latch. The kind of thing people used when they expected trouble and did not trust anybody with nice furniture. The courier handed me the clipboard. "I need your signature, the last 4 of your social security number, and confirmation of delivery location." "Delivery location?" He pointed to the form. "Instructions specify this exact workplace address. Night shift delivery only. Recipient must be on site and alone, or delivery is postponed." I stared at him. Grandma Josephine had been dead for 3 years, and she still had better operational security than most startups. I signed. The courier checked my ID, took back the clipboard, then handed me a sealed envelope. "This contains the access instructions. I am also required to tell you the package was held in escrow until conditions were met." "What conditions?" "I am not given that information." "Of course not." Grandma Josephine always believed that people talked too much when they did not know enough. I used to think she was being dramatic. Now I considered it a pretty solid management principle. The courier nodded once and left. I stood in the office with the lockbox on my desk, listening to his footsteps fade toward the loading dock. For a moment, I did nothing. I had spent the evening realizing my father had blacklisted me across the tech industry. Now a dead woman had sent me a secure package at my warehouse job in the middle of the night. Some families leave recipes. Mine apparently left encrypted evidence and emotional whiplash. I opened the envelope. Inside was one sheet of cream-colored paper, folded once. The handwriting was Grandma Josephine's. Sharp, slanted, impatient. Even her letters looked like they had somewhere better to be. "Delaney, if this reaches you, then Arthur has either tried to isolate you professionally, financially, or both." I hoped I was wrong. I rarely am. Which has been inconvenient for many men in my life. "Do not open this at home. Do not involve your parents. Do not connect the drive inside to any networked device. Use an air-gapped terminal. You will know what to do." Under the note was a 6-digit code. My throat tightened. But I did not cry. Not then. Grandma Josephine had never been soft in the usual way. She did not bake cookies. She did not pinch cheeks. She once told me, when I was 12, that if a man called me difficult, I should ask whether he meant accurate. That was her version of a hug. I entered the code into the lockbox. The latches clicked open. Inside, there was no jewelry, no stack of cash, no sentimental letter tied with ribbon. Thank heaven. I was not emotionally equipped for ribbon. There was an old physical ledger, thick and worn, with black binding and yellowed pages. Beside it sat an external hard drive in a shockproof case. Under both was a small printed label. "For Delaney only." I lifted the ledger first. It smelled like paper, dust, and something faintly metallic. The first page had dates, account names, project titles, and initials written in Josephine's handwriting. I saw Crosstech before it had been Crosstech. I saw architecture notes, early investment records, contract references. Then I saw my father's name, Arthur, repeated over and over. Not as founder. Not as architect. As recipient. Borrowed access. Transferred authority. Temporary control. That last phrase made my stomach turn. I set the ledger down and picked up the hard drive. The old me might have hesitated. The daughter in me might have been scared of what I would find. But the woman sitting in that office at 3 in the morning had just been told to surrender to reality. So I did. I surrendered to the real one. The warehouse had a retired diagnostic machine in the back storage closet. An old workstation we used for corrupted drives and malware checks. It had no active network card. No Wi-Fi. And no connection to the company system. Air-gapped. Ugly. And perfect. I hauled it onto the desk. Plugged it into a local power strip. And connected the external drive. The machine took its sweet time booting up. Old hardware does not rush for anybody. It has seen things. When the drive mounted, it asked for a password. I looked back at Josephine's note. You will know what to do. I almost laughed. That was helpful in the same way. Just be yourself is helpful before a courtroom testimony. Then I noticed something written in tiny letters at the bottom of the page. Not a password. A hint. The first thing they tried to steal from you. I stared at it. My first code repository, when I was 16. I had built a small predictive routing tool for one of Grandma Josephine's old logistics contacts. Nothing fancy by today's standards. But it worked. It predicted local delivery delays based on weather, warehouse load times, and traffic patterns. I had named it Sparrow. Grandma Josephine had said it was a good name because sparrows survived by being small, fast, and underestimated. I typed it in. Sparrow, access denied. I frowned. Then I remembered her rules. Josephine hated lazy passwords. She once told me birthdays were for cakes, not security. I typed the full project name. Sparrow root. Access denied. I sat back. Then it hit me. She would not use what I named it. She would use what she called it. I typed. Littlebird. The drive unlocked. A folder appeared on the screen. Josephine Archive. Inside were subfolders by year. Company. Project. Legal. Personal. And one labeled. Start here. Delaney. My hand hovered over the mouse. The office suddenly felt too small. The server fans were too loud. The warehouse outside seemed impossibly far away. Like I was at the bottom of a well with a dead woman holding the rope. I clicked the folder. There was one video file. Josephine, message, final. I stared at the file name for a long time. Then I played it. The screen went black for half a second before Grandma Josephine appeared. She was sitting at her old desk, wearing a navy cardigan and the expression of a woman who had already read the contract and found 3 lies before breakfast. Her hair was silver, pinned back neatly. Her eyes were tired but sharp, very sharp. Hello, Delaney, she said. My breath caught. I had not heard her voice in 3 years. The recording quality was plain. No dramatic lighting, no soft music, no nonsense. That was Josephine. If she had known someone added background music to her final message, she would have come back just to file a complaint. She leaned closer to the camera. If you are watching this, your father has done exactly what I feared he would. He has tried to starve you into submission. I stopped breathing for a second. On the screen, Grandma Josephine's jaw tightened. Arthur was never as brilliant as he needed people to believe. But he was clever enough to steal from people who loved him. I protected what I could. I documented what I could. And I waited. Because evidence used too early becomes a warning. Evidence used at the right time becomes a blade. She paused. Then, for the first time in the video, she almost smiled. Let's show him why he should have feared us both. I watched that sentence 3 times before I touched the keyboard again. Not because I did not understand it. Because for the first time in 2 years, someone had looked at my situation and called it what it was. Not bad luck. Not a difficult market. Not my attitude. Not my tone. Not my failure to be more flexible. Which is what people say when they want you to accept mistreatment with better posture. Grandma Josephine had named it. Arthur had tried to starve me into submission. That was exactly what it felt like. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Practical. He had not needed to break down my door or empty my bank account. He just cut me off from the career I had spent my whole adult life building, then waited for desperation to make me obedient. Very efficient. Very corporate. Very dad. I replayed the rest of the video once, then copied it to the local encrypted partition on the air-gapped machine. Grandma Josephine had left instructions inside the same folder. Of course she had. Even from the grave. That woman believed in documentation. There were 3 rules. Do not connect the drive to the internet. Do not confront Arthur until the evidence is organized. Do not trust anyone who benefits from your silence. That last one sat with me for a while. Because when you are raised in a family that trains you to doubt yourself, silence starts to feel like peace. It is not. Sometimes silence is just the carpet they sweep you under. I spent the rest of that shift pretending to work like a normal person. I fixed a scanner issue. I reset 2 passwords. I told a supervisor that no, unplugging the router every time it blinked was not refreshing the internet. I drank another cup of break room coffee, which tasted like regret with a hint of motor oil. Then, when the warehouse day shift came in and the sky outside turned pale, I carried the lockbox to my car like it was radioactive. For the next few weeks, my life split in 2. At night, I worked warehouse IT. By day, I decrypted Grandma Josephine's archive. Sleep became less of a routine and more of a rumor. I lived on black coffee, peanut butter toast, and the kind of determination that makes doctors concerned and enemies nervous. The archive was not just a family record. It was a map of a theft that had taken years. Grandma Josephine had been a systems architect before most people understood what that meant. Back when tech conferences still had more bad suits than hoodies, she was building logistics software for shipping companies, medical suppliers, and manufacturing firms across the West Coast. She was not famous in the flashy way. She did not stand on stages wearing sneakers that cost more than my rent. She built things that worked, then let louder people take the microphones. Cross-Tech Consulting, the company my father loved to describe as his life's work, had begun as Josephine's private infrastructure firm, not Arthur's, hers. I found incorporation drafts, early client contracts, handwritten architecture diagrams, source control records, and bank transfers. Grandma had built the original platform. She had brought Arthur in later, first as a business development lead, then as acting manager during a medical leave. Temporary control. There was that phrase again. Temporary. The most dangerous word in a family business. It means someone is already measuring the curtains. The ledger from the lockbox matched the digital files. Every project code. Every client payment. Every transfer of authority had a paper twin. Grandma Josephine had not trusted digital records alone. Smart woman. Hard drives fail. People lie. Paper waits. I scanned everything into my offline system and built an evidence index. Dates, names, contracts, access changes, signatures, payment trails. It was boring, slow, and exactly how real revenge looks when you are not interested in going to jail. Then I opened the Kendall folder. That was where the air in my apartment changed. The folder was labeled with her startup's name, Lumascale Analytics. Kendall had been parading that company around like she had personally invented electricity. My parents talked about it at every dinner. My mother called Kendall a visionary, usually while looking in my direction to make sure the knife landed cleanly. Arthur said Lumascale would become the new standard in predictive enterprise automation. Translation: another expensive tool executives could use to say efficiency in meetings. I had avoided reading about it because, frankly, I had enough indigestion in my life. But Grandma Josephine's archive had collected more than public press releases. It had back-end architecture notes, investor decks, code samples, internal technical summaries. I opened the first source file and felt my face go cold. Not angry. Cold. Anger comes later. When your body catches up. The architecture was mine. Not inspired by mine. Not similar to mine. Mine, 4 years earlier. During my senior year of college. I had built a distributed anomaly detection system for enterprise logistics. It could spot suspicious data movement across large systems without relying on heavy central processing. I had designed it for supply chain fraud detection. But the architecture could be adapted for finance, insurance, shipping, and cloud security. I called it Meridian. I remember the night I showed the first working demo to my father. I was sitting at his kitchen island with my laptop open, exhausted and proud in that foolish way young people get before family teaches them caution. Arthur watched the demo without blinking. He asked intelligent questions. Too many. Maybe. But back then, I thought it meant he respected the work. 2 weeks later, he told me there were concerns about ownership because I had discussed the concept while using Crosstech's office Wi-Fi during a summer internship. Office Wi-Fi. That was his legal hook. I had been 22 and stupid enough to believe my father would never weaponize a router. He said the cleanest solution was to let Crosstech review the code temporarily. Temporarily. There was that word again. Wearing a nicer suit. Then the accusations began. First inside the family. Then inside Crosstech. Then, apparently, everywhere that mattered. I opened more files from Kendall's startup. Module names had been changed. Comments had been stripped. Variable structures had been cleaned just enough to fool a lazy reviewer, but the bones were mine. Every developer has fingerprints. Not the cute kind people talk about in documentaries. Real fingerprints. Habits in logic flow. Naming patterns. Error handling preferences. The weird little shortcuts you build because your brain likes certain roads better than others. Kendall had copied roads she did not know how to drive. I pulled up my original Meridian repository from an offline backup I kept on an old solid-state drive in my closet. It was one of the few things I had refused to delete. Even during my lowest months. Maybe stubbornness saves more women than optimism ever has. Then I ran a structural comparison. The match rate was brutal. 78% direct architecture overlap. 91% in the core anomaly engine. Several utility functions were copied almost line for line, with only renamed variables. Kendall's award-winning algorithm, the one my parents had used to parade her in front of investors and journalists, was my senior project with makeup and a fake ID. I sat back in my chair and laughed. One sharp, ugly laugh. Not because it was funny, because my sister had called me the slow one in the family while selling my code to venture capitalists. You almost have to admire the confidence. Almost. Then I found the investor memo. Lumascale Analytics was preparing for a $50 million venture capital round. $50 million on stolen code. My stolen code. The memo named Kendall as founder and lead architect. Arthur was listed as strategic advisor through Crosstech Consulting. Valerie had no technical role. Naturally. But she had written one of those glowing founder bios mothers write when they confuse children with investment products. I kept digging. Grandma Josephine's archive included more than proof that Arthur had taken my project. It included proof that he had transferred intellectual property rights into Kendall's name through a private Crosstech filing dated 6 weeks after he accused me of internal theft. 6 weeks. That man did not just steal the horse. He filed paperwork saying I had trespassed in the stable. The file included metadata, raw timestamps, original author records, local machine identifiers, repository creation logs. My name appeared again and again. Delaney Cross. Original author. Primary architect. Initial commit. The transfer document naming Kendall had been created later. Backdated. And routed through Crosstech's legal office under Arthur's authorization. That alone could have destroyed the lie. But Grandma Josephine had left one more thing. In the Meridian folder was a subfolder labeled Signature. Inside was a short note from her. Delaney, you were always too trusting with your work. So I helped you protect it before you knew protection was necessary. Open the architecture map. I did. A diagram appeared on the screen, showing the deep dependency structure of the anomaly engine. At the bottom was a small, embedded validation string tied into the foundational logic. It was not obvious in the normal source view. It sat beneath the active layers. Woven into an old diagnostic pathway most developers would ignore unless they were auditing the architecture from the root. A latent digital signature. Grandma Josephine had helped me build it during one of our weekend coding sessions. I remembered asking her why we were adding something nobody would ever see. She had said, "Because someday the person who steals your house may repaint the walls. You should still know where the foundation is." At the time, I thought she was being intense. Grandma Josephine did not do mild. The signature was simple, clean, and devastating. Authored by Delaney Cross. Not in a comment that could be deleted. Not in a label that could be changed. Embedded in the architecture itself. A structural marker. A fingerprint under the floorboards. I ran the same diagnostic pathway through Kendall's Lumascale code. There it was, still intact. They had stolen the house, repainted the walls, invited investors over, and never checked the foundation. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. For the first time, I understood the shape of what Grandma Josephine had given me. Not a defense, a weapon. But weapons are useless if you swing them at the wrong time. Arthur had money, lawyers, industry relationships, and a talent for making lies sound like policy. I had proof, but proof needed leverage. It needed a room where people could not ignore it. It needed witnesses who mattered. I saved the diagnostic results to an encrypted USB and placed it back inside the lockbox beside the ledger. Then I looked at Grandma Josephine's photograph on the old drive thumbnail, her eyes sharp even in a frozen frame. "All right," I said quietly. "Now I know what he stole." My email chimed. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the sender. No name, no company branding, just a private address and one subject line. Apex Solutions would like to speak with you. Apex Solutions would like to speak with you. I read the subject line twice, then checked the sender again. Still no name. Still no company logo. Still no cheerful recruiter language about exciting opportunities and fast-paced environments, which usually means underpaid chaos with free granola bars. The email itself was short. Delaney Cross. We are conducting a confidential search for a technical audit consultant. Your background may be relevant. If you are willing to meet privately, please arrive at Apex Solutions headquarters this Thursday at 9 in the morning. Use the east entrance. Ask for L. Mercer. No resume submission required. No phone screen. No attachments. No signature. A normal person would have called that suspicious. I was no longer operating with the luxury of normal. Apex Solutions was not just another tech firm. It was the firm my father hated with the kind of professional bitterness usually reserved for lawsuits and golf partners who cheat. Apex was larger than Crosstech, cleaner in public reputation, and aggressive in acquisitions. If Crosstech moved like a private club, Apex moved like a courtroom with better lighting. They competed for the same clients, same enterprise contracts, same government-adjacent consulting work, same investors who liked words like scalable, defensible, and proprietary, especially when someone else had done the real work. Arthur always spoke about Apex with a tight mouth. They buy innovation, he would say, like that was a sin, coming from a man who stole innovation from his own daughter. That was rich enough to need a tax form. I did not reply right away. Instead, I printed the email, saved the header data, and examined the routing path on my offline tools. I had learned enough from Grandma Josephine to treat every open door like it might have a camera behind it. The message had come through a private relay, but not a sloppy one. Whoever sent it knew how to hide without looking like they were hiding. That either meant a professional recruiter, a corporate legal team, or someone setting a trap with a very nice budget. I spent the next day preparing both for opportunity and disaster. That sounds dramatic, but in tech, the difference between an interview and an ambush is often just who controls the conference room. I copied a limited evidence packet onto a separate encrypted USB. Not the full archive, not the whole ledger. Just enough to prove I was not bluffing if I needed to defend myself. Metadata summaries, architecture comparison reports, a hash record from the original Meridian files, the embedded signature diagnostic. The rest stayed locked away. Grandma Josephine's rule kept repeating in my head. Do not trust anyone who benefits from your silence. I added my own rule under it. Do not trust anyone who suddenly benefits from your noise either. On Thursday morning, I stood in front of the mirror wearing the best suit I owned. Best is a generous word. It was a black suit I bought from a discount outlet after my first big interview 2 years earlier. Back when I still believed being qualified would be enough. The sleeves were a little too long, and the jacket pulled slightly at the shoulder. But I had tailored it myself with the patience of someone who could not afford a tailor and had strong feelings about YouTube tutorials. I tied my hair back, kept my makeup minimal, and put the encrypted USB in the inside pocket of my bag. Then I drove to Apex Solutions. Their headquarters sat in San Jose. All steel, glass, and expensive landscaping designed to say, "We are innovative, but please do not sit on the grass." The building was tall enough to make Crosstech look like a boutique firm with ambition issues. I parked in visitor parking and sat for a minute. My hands were steady. That had become my warning sign. When I got emotional, I got quiet. When I got scared, I got precise. My family used to call that cold. Grandma Josephine called it useful. I went to the east entrance. A security guard looked up from the desk. Name? Delaney Cross. I am here to see L. Mercer. He checked the screen. His eyebrows moved slightly. But he did not comment. Top floor, he said. Someone will meet you at the elevator. Top floor. Wonderful. Nothing says casual interview like being sent straight to the corporate altitude where oxygen and mercy both get thin. A woman in a gray suit met me when the elevator opened. She was in her 50s, with silver glasses, practical shoes, and the expression of someone who had personally ended nonsense in multiple departments. Miss Cross? Yes. I am Laura Mercer. This way. Her handshake was firm, not performative. She did not look me up and down. She did not smile too much. I liked her immediately, which meant I reminded myself not to. She led me down a quiet hallway past offices with frosted glass walls. I expected a conference room with a recruiter, maybe 2 engineers, maybe an HR person who would ask me to describe a time I overcame conflict, as if I had not been raised by conflict in business casual. Instead, Laura opened a door to a private office. A man stood near the window, looking out over the city. Harrison Locke. I recognized him from industry articles. CEO of Apex Solutions, early 60s, tall, lean, silver-haired, with the calm posture of someone who had long ago stopped needing to prove he belonged in a room. He turned when I entered. Delaney Cross, he said. Not a question. Yes. I am Harrison Locke. I know. One corner of his mouth moved. Good. That saves us some time. Laura Mercer closed the door behind me but stayed in the room. I noticed that. Not alone. Not hidden. A witness. Either for my protection or his. Harrison gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please sit. I did. He sat across from me and opened a thin folder. No small talk. Good. I am going to start plainly, he said. Your father told me you were a thief. There it was again. The word had lost some of its sting from repetition, but not all of it. Words like that are built to stain. I kept my face still. Did he? Harrison slid a printed document across the desk. I looked down. It was the Blacklist report, my father's masterpiece of corporate poison. The header carried Crosstech legal formatting. The language was careful, clinical, cowardly. It accused me of unauthorized access, intellectual property theft, attempted misappropriation, and reputational risk. It said the matter had been handled privately in the interest of family discretion. Family discretion. That was one way to describe burying your daughter and calling it mercy. I read the report slowly, though I had already heard enough from Marissa to understand it. Seeing it printed made it different. More real, more stupid. 2. Lies often look bigger when whispered. On paper, they start showing their seams. Harrison watched me. You are not surprised, he said. No. Angry? Yes. You hide it well. I was raised by people who used emotion as evidence against me. Laura Mercer looked down at her notebook. I saw her pen pause. Harrison's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. That sounds like Josephine. My throat tightened at the name. You knew my grandmother? I did. Toe. He leaned back slightly. Josephine Whitaker was Apex's first silent investor. For the first time since I walked into the building, I felt my control slip. Not much. Just enough. What? She invested when this company was still 8 people. Bad chairs. And a rented office with a leaking ceiling. I was younger, louder, and less smart than I thought. Josephine told me the product was promising. The contracts were weak, and my ego was a security vulnerability. That sounded exactly like her. She was right, he added. She usually was. Annoying, wasn't it? Deeply, he smiled then. A real one. Brief and sad. Josephine warned me 10 years ago that Arthur was a liar. The room went quiet. Harrison reached into the folder and removed another document. This one was older. A scanned letter on Josephine's letterhead. She told me Arthur had a talent for appearing respectable while moving ownership one signature at a time. She asked me to keep distance from Crosstech unless she contacted me directly. Later, she updated the instruction. What instruction? If her granddaughter ever came under professional attack, I was to investigate before believing a word attached to Arthur Cross's name. I stared at him. Grandma Josephine had not just left me evidence, she had left me a door. Not a guarantee, not a rescue. A door. There is a difference. And older people know it better than anyone. A rescue can make you dependent. A door gives you a choice. Harrison folded his hands on the desk. Miss Cross, I need to know what you have. I studied him. This was the dangerous part. Evidence changes depending on where you place it. In the wrong room, it becomes leverage against you. In the right room, it becomes a key. I had to decide what kind of room this was. So I asked the question Grandma would have asked. What do you gain by helping me? Laura Mercer's eyes flicked up. Harrison did not look offended. That told me something. Potentially, he said. A technical auditor with unusual insight into a competitor's fraud. Legally, a chance to avoid acquiring stolen intellectual property. Personally, the satisfaction of honoring a promise to a woman who once saved my company from my own arrogance. That is a clean answer. It is the only kind worth giving in this room. I reached into my bag and placed the encrypted USB on the desk. Limited packet, I said. Not the full archive. Smart. Necessary. Also, Josephine. I almost smiled. Laura brought over a secure laptop. Not connected to Wi-Fi. No open ports except the one she needed. She knew what she was doing. I entered the password myself. For the next 40 minutes, I walked Harrison Locke through the architecture comparison between Meridian and Lumascale analytics. I showed him the source structure, the metadata, the backdated transfer. The embedded signature Grandma Josephine had helped me build into the foundation. I did not dramatize it. Data does not need dramatic lighting. It needs a competent audience. Harrison listened without interrupting. Laura took notes. Twice. She asked technical questions, sharp enough to tell me Apex had not put a decorative executive assistant in the room. She was legal operations. Maybe compliance. Definitely dangerous in the useful way. When I finished, Harrison stood and walked to the window. He stayed there for a moment, looking down at the city. Then he turned back. Arthur is in acquisition talks with us. I felt the floor shift under the sentence. Kendall's company? Yes. Lumascale Analytics. Arthur has been pushing hard. He says it is Kendall's breakthrough. He wants Apex to acquire it before the next funding round. How much? 80 million? I let out one slow breath. Of course, my stolen senior project had aged well. Harrison returned to his chair. We have not completed technical due diligence yet. That process begins soon. I understood before he said it. You want me to audit it. I want you to lead the audit. That would expose me. Not at first. We can shield your identity under a contractor alias. Only a small internal team would know. And when Arthur finds out? Harrison looked directly at me. That depends on what you want. For 2 years, I had wanted my old life back. My career? My name. A chance to be judged by my work instead of my father's lies. Now, sitting across from the CEO of Apex Solutions, I realized I did not want my old life. I wanted a clean one, built on truth, backed by evidence, protected by people who understood that family loyalty does not include letting someone bury you alive. Harrison slid the blacklist report back toward himself and tapped it once. Your father told me you were a thief, he said calmly. But Josephine warned me he was a liar. She asked me to wait until you were ready. He paused. Are you? I looked at the USB on the desk, then at the report, then at the man my grandmother had trusted enough to leave standing at the right door. Yes, I said, and for the first time in years. The word did not sound like survival. It sounded like a beginning. Harrison did not shake my hand right away. I respected that. Some men hear the word yes and immediately start acting like they bought the person who said it. Harrison Locke simply nodded, closed the folder containing my father's fake blacklist report, and turned to Laura Mercer. Prepare the contractor structure, he said. Need to know only. Legal, compliance, and technical due diligence. No wider circulation. Laura wrote that down. Alias? Harrison looked at me. I thought for 1 second. Is predation. Formated. Whitaker, I said. Grandma Josephine's maiden name. Laura's pen paused just long enough for me to notice. Then she wrote it down. Harrison gave the smallest smile. Appropriate. That afternoon, I walked out of Apex Solutions with a temporary badge that did not have my real last name on it. A secure laptop configured by their internal compliance team. And an employment contract that paid more per week than my warehouse job paid in a month. I still went to the warehouse that night. Not because I needed to. Harrison had offered to start me immediately with enough advance pay to cover rent, food, and the small mountain of unpaid dental work I had been pretending was optional. But I went anyway because I had promised to finish my shift. And because I wanted one last night, in a place where broken things admitted they were broken. At 2 a.m, I sat in that little IT office, listening to server fans and forklifts, and opened the Apex contract again. Lead technical auditor, confidential contractor, reporting directly to Harrison Locke and Laura Mercer, corporate alias, Dana Whitaker. Scope, acquisition due diligence for Lumascale Analytics, my sister's company, my stolen code, my father's big shining deal. I should have felt triumphant. I did not. Triumph is loud. What I felt was colder and cleaner than that. I felt aligned. For 2 years, my life had been a hallway of locked doors. Now I had a key. But that did not mean I could start kicking things open like an amateur. Evidence had to move through the proper channels. Audit trails had to be clean. Chain of custody mattered. Access logs mattered. Permissions mattered. That is the thing people do not understand about real consequences. They are not built from revenge speeches. They are built from paperwork nobody can wiggle out of. The next morning, I resigned from the warehouse. My supervisor, Carl, looked at my notice like I had handed him a dead fish. You got another IT job? Yes. Better pay? Much better. He nodded. Good. This place was wasting you. That caught me off guard. Carl was not sentimental. He once described a warehouse holiday party as a tax write-off with cookies. Compliments from him came about as often as printer toner that arrived on time. Thank you, I said. He shrugged. Just don't become one of those tech people who says, circle back. I would rather step on a rake. Good girl. I packed my backpack, took one last look at the server rack, and left before I could become emotional over equipment that still ran Windows Server like it had a personal grudge against the future. Apex gave me a small private office on a restricted floor. No nameplate. No window. Just a secure workstation. Locked cabinets. And access to the Lumascale due diligence environment. Perfect. For the first week, I did not touch the obvious theft. That would have been too easy. Instead, I reviewed the company like any auditor should. Financial dependencies, user metrics, data source, infrastructure costs, client contracts, security posture, DevOps logs, repository history, employee access patterns, cloud billing, API traffic. I built the case from the outside in. Arthur had trained people to see me as emotional, unstable, bitter, and dishonest. So I made sure the audit did not depend on my feelings. If someone removed my name from the report, the fraud would still stand. If someone claimed I had a family motive, the numbers would still sit there, staring back like unpaid taxes. And the numbers were ugly. Lumascale claimed to have enterprise traction across several major logistics clients. The user dashboard showed impressive growth. Active accounts, daily engagement, high-volume data processing, the kind of chart investors love because it goes up and to the right, which apparently makes very rich people clap like toddlers watching bubbles. But the back end told a different story. A lot of the accounts were inactive shells. Some enterprise users had never logged in. Several demo environments were being counted as live clients. Internal test traffic had been inflated and relabeled as customer activity. One supposed major customer was just a sandbox instance with a different logo slapped on the interface. It was not growth. It was theater. Expensive theater. But still theater. By the second week, I found the fabricated logs. Not sloppy enough for a junior engineer to catch in 5 minutes, but not clean enough to survive a proper audit. Timestamps repeated in patterns no real user behavior would create. IP ranges looped too neatly. Session durations clustered around numbers that looked realistic until you graphed them. People who fake data always forget that real people are messy. They click weird things. They abandon tasks. They log in at lunch. Get interrupted. Come back later. Misspell their own company names. And use passwords that make security teams weep quietly in elevators. LumaScale's users behaved like a PowerPoint presentation. That meant someone had generated activity to impress investors. I documented everything. Screenshots, hash values, original file paths, access history, export logs. No dramatic commentary. Just facts. Laura Mercer reviewed my findings every other day. She asked sharp legal questions. Can this be explained by migration testing? No. Could a vendor have produced the shell traffic? Only if the vendor also had internal admin credentials and a deep interest in securities fraud. She looked over her glasses. Try not to enjoy saying that. I am not enjoying it. You are enjoying it a little. A professional amount. Harrison checked in less often. But when he did, he listened carefully. He never pushed me to move faster. That mattered. A man in his position could have treated my family scandal like a useful corporate weapon. Instead, he treated it like a loaded system that needed containment. Halfway through the audit, he told me something important. Arthur is getting impatient. Good, I said. Harrison gave me a look. I corrected myself, professionally. That creates useful pressure. Better. Arthur had been calling Apex executives directly, trying to rush the acquisition before the final due diligence report. He wanted the $80 million deal signed before the next investor round, before anyone looked too closely. Before Kendall had to answer technical questions, she could not survive without a script. That told me he knew the ground under him was soft. Then I found out why. Crosstech's internal financial materials were not supposed to be part of the LumaScale audit. But Arthur had tied the companies together in ways he clearly thought would stay hidden. He had positioned Crosstech as a strategic support partner for Kendall's startup. That opened a side door into related obligations, shared infrastructure expenses, and bridge financing. I followed the money. That is usually where the bodies are buried, not literal bodies. This is corporate fraud, not cable television. But the principle holds. Arthur had leveraged the family home. Not just a line of credit, a heavy one. He had used Crosstech assets as collateral to support LumaScale's valuation. He had shifted internal staff hours into Kendall's company while billing them under consulting categories. Then I found the pension fund exposure. At first, I thought I was reading it wrong. I actually got up, walked out of the office, drank water, came back, and read it again. No mistake. Crosstech's employee pension reserves had been used indirectly through a risky internal loan structure tied to LumaScale's acquisition success. If Apex bought LumaScale for $80 million, Arthur could patch the gap before anyone noticed. If the deal failed, Crosstech employees could be exposed to serious losses, pending legal recovery. My father had not only stolen my code, he had gambled other people's retirement on it. That was the first moment I had to stop working and just sit there. I thought about the older employees at Crosstech, the administrative staff who had been there for decades, engineers close to retirement, people who had probably trusted Arthur because he wore good suits and used phrases like family culture at company events. Family culture. There it was again. The favorite camouflage of people who expected loyalty from everyone and accountability from no one. I prepared a separate risk memo for Laura and Harrison. Potential employee retirement fund exposure. Possible wire fraud through inflated metrics submitted across state lines. Potential securities violations tied to investor materials. IP theft with documented author metadata. Misrepresentation during acquisition negotiations. When Laura read it, she became very quiet. That was when I knew it was worse than I thought. Harrison came into my office 20 minutes later and closed the door. Delaney, he said. And it was the first time he had used my real name inside the restricted floor. I looked up. This is no longer just an acquisition problem. I know. If your findings hold, Apex will have mandatory reporting obligations to the SEC and possibly federal authorities, depending on counsel's review. I nodded. There should have been satisfaction in that. There was not. I hated Arthur. I hated what he had done to me. But the collapse of a company is never just one man falling through the floor. Other people are standing nearby. Some innocent, some willfully blind, some just trying to make a paycheck and get home before dinner gets cold. That was why the report had to be perfect. Not angry, not personal, perfect. Over the next month, I worked longer hours than I had at the warehouse. But this time, the exhaustion had a purpose. I built the final audit like a structure meant to survive an earthquake. Every claim sourced, every file hashed, every comparison reproducible, every timeline verified. Grandma Josephine's archive stayed separate until the legal team approved its use as supporting evidence. The Apex data alone established enough concern to halt the acquisition. Grandma's evidence would do something more permanent. It would prove origin. It would prove theft. It would prove that the story my father told about me had been built backward from a crime he committed. Near the end of the 4th week, I sat alone in the restricted office with the final draft open in front of me. Recommendation: terminate acquisition pending legal review. Secondary recommendation: preserve all communications and notify appropriate authorities. I read the closing paragraph 3 times. Then I added one final attachment: embedded architecture signature diagnostic, authored by Delaney Cross. I stared at my own name. For years, my father had turned it into a warning. Now it was evidence. I saved the report, encrypted the final packet, and placed the USB in my bag. That evening, Laura stopped by my office. "Kendall's pre-acquisition gala is tomorrow night," she said. "I saw the invitation. Are you going?" My parents had sent it to me through a family group email, probably so nobody could accuse them of excluding me. Valerie had written, "We hope you can come support your sister during this important milestone." Support. That word did a lot of unpaid labor in my family. "Yes," I said. Laura studied me. As Delaney or Dana, I shut down the monitor and picked up my bag. As the daughter they still think they buried. The next evening, I stood in front of my closet and picked the plainest dress I owned. Not ugly, not sloppy. Plain. Navy. Knee length. Simple sleeves. No glitter. No designer label screaming for attention like it needed validation from strangers. It was the kind of dress that said I paid my own rent and read contracts before signing them. In my family, that counted as suspicious behavior. I put the encrypted USB in a small black clutch and checked twice to make sure it was secure. The final audit was already backed up through Apex's legal chain of custody. The USB was not the only copy. I was not foolish enough to carry the fate of an $80 million fraud case in a purse like some spy movie extra with good cheekbones. Still, having it with me mattered. Not because I planned to use it that night. Because I wanted to feel the weight of the truth while everyone else celebrated the lie. Kendall's pre-acquisition gala was being held at a private country club in Atherton. The kind of place where the hedges looked wealthier than most working families. The driveway curved past trimmed lawns, soft lighting, and a valet stand full of young men pretending not to judge cars while absolutely judging cars. I handed over the keys to my used Honda. The valet smiled politely, which was impressive. That little car had seen things. The right rear door made a sound like it was clearing its throat. And the dashboard light had been on for so long I considered it part of the interior design. Inside, the clubhouse was all polished wood, white flowers, champagne glass, and people laughing in that careful, rich person way where nobody shows too many teeth unless money has already changed hands. A banner near the entrance read, "Celebrating Lumiscale Analytics and the Future of Enterprise Intelligence." The future of enterprise intelligence was apparently stolen from my college project and decorated with lilies. I signed in at the guest table. The young woman checking names looked down at the list. "Delaney Cross?" "Yes." She hesitated. There it was, that tiny pause I had come to know. The pause people made when a private warning floated behind your name. Then she handed me a small place card. Table 19. Near the back. Of course, Kendall was at table 1. Glowing beneath a chandelier. Surrounded by investors, advisors, and people who like to use the word disruption while wearing shoes that cost more than a mortgage payment in Kansas. Arthur stood beside her, one hand on the back of her chair like he had built her from premium materials. Valerie floated nearby, greeting guests with practiced warmth. My mother had always been excellent at making strangers feel loved and her own daughter feel like a clerical error. When she saw me, her face brightened. Not with joy. With performance? Delaney, she said, coming over with open arms. You made it. I was invited. Her smile tightened for half a second. Of course you were. This is a family milestone. Family milestone. That was one way to describe federal exposure in formal wear. She kissed the air near my cheek. You look nice, she said. Thank you. Simple. There it was. In my mother's language, simple meant poor, disappointing, or not. Kendall. You look expensive, I said. She blinked, unsure whether that was a compliment. It was not. Kendall appeared behind her with a glass of champagne and the pleased expression of someone who believed life had finally arranged itself correctly. Delaney, she said. Oh, you came? I did. That's sweet. She looked me over. You didn't have to dress up too much. This is just a business thing. I glanced around at the floral arrangements. String quartet. Photographers? And a dessert table large enough to support a small election campaign. Good thing I held back, I said. Kendall gave a short laugh. Not because she understood the joke, but because she assumed anything I said was beneath her. Arthur joined us a moment later. He wore a dark suit, crisp shirt, and the satisfied face of a man standing on a bridge he did not know was already burning from the other side. Delaney, he said. Dad, I'm glad you came to support your sister. Support again. That word deserved hazard pay. I wouldn't miss it. His eyes narrowed slightly, searching my face. Arthur had always been good at detecting defiance, but only when it looked like anger. He had no idea what to do with calm. A photographer approached and asked for a family photo. Valerie instantly arranged us like furniture. Arthur and Kendall in the center, Valerie beside them, me slightly to the side. Close enough to count, but far enough to crop if necessary. Kendall leaned toward me just before the flash. Try not to look miserable, she whispered. I smiled. The camera clicked. That might have been the best picture I ever took with my family. Dinner began with speeches. Arthur spoke first. Naturally, he welcomed everyone, thanked the investors, praised Apex's visionary interest, and described Kendall as one of the most gifted young technical minds in the country. I took a sip of sparkling water. Technically, that sentence contained several words. Factually, it contained none. Kendall gave her speech next. She talked about innovation, perseverance, and building something from nothing. I almost admired the nerve. There she was, standing under warm lights, wearing a dress that probably cost 4 months of my warehouse salary, telling a room full of investors how she had built my system from nothing. Nothing was apparently my labor, my education, and my stolen authorship. Good to know. At my table, an older man in a gray blazer turned to me. Are you with the company? I smiled politely. No. I'm Kendall's sister. Oh, his expression shifted. The other daughter. The other daughter. I had been called worse, but few things more accurate. That's me. What do you do? I work in systems. Before he could ask more, Valerie appeared behind my chair as if summoned by the possibility that I might be treated like a person. Delaney is between things, she said smoothly. She's had a difficult time finding the right fit. I looked up at her. Have I? Her hand tightened lightly on the back of my chair. Arthur stepped in beside her. Delaney is still figuring out where she belongs, he said to the man. Kendall, on the other hand, found her calling early. The man nodded with the mild discomfort of someone who had accidentally opened a family closet and found it full of raccoons. I picked up my glass. I'm very good with systems that don't collapse under pressure, I said. Arthur's jaw moved. Valerie laughed too brightly. Oh! Delaney and her dry humor. Yes, I said. Dry. That's the problem. Kendall came over after her speech, flushed with attention and champagne. People loved it, she said. They seemed impressed. They should be. She leaned closer. You know, once the acquisition closes, I could help you. I looked at her. Help me? Sure. Pay off your little student loans. Maybe get you a better apartment. I know things have been hard. My student loans were not little. Neither was my patience. That's generous, she smiled. I mean, We all have different strengths. Some people build companies. Some people keep trying. That's still brave. There it was again, the soft knife. I appreciate your concern, I said. You don't have to be embarrassed, Delaney. It's okay to be the slow one in the family. For a second, I looked at my sister and almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because underneath all that polish, she really believed what they had told her. She believed she was the genius. The chosen one. The rightful owner of every room she entered. She had never had to build confidence from truth because my parents had handed her applause in bulk. That was going to make the fall harder. Slow can be useful, I said. You notice things fast people miss? She rolled her eyes. Still talking like Grandma? Someone should. Her smile disappeared. Before she could answer, Arthur appeared at my side and touched my elbow. Walk with me. It was not a request. I followed him out onto a side terrace overlooking the golf course. The night air was cool. Through the windows behind us, the party glowed gold and white. Every guest laughing inside a lie. Arthur waited until we were alone. I know you're bitter, he said. I looked at him. Do you? You have always struggled with Kendall's success. That must be it. He ignored the tone. There are Apex executives here tonight. Important people. I do not want you approaching them. I wasn't planning to nine. His eyes hardened. I mean it. Delaney, don't ruin your sister's deal with your toxic reputation. Toxic reputation. That was impressive, considering he had manufactured it himself. My father could poison a well, then accuse the water of having an attitude. I looked past him through the window. Harrison Locke was inside, speaking with Laura Mercer near the far wall. He did not look toward me. Smartman. Arthur followed my gaze and lowered his voice. You may not care about your own future, but Kendall has worked too hard for you to embarrass this family. That line almost got me, not because it hurt, because it was so absurd I nearly laughed in his face. Kendall had worked too hard? Kendall had stolen code she could not explain, inflated numbers she could not defend, and stood on a stage accepting praise for a product held together by fraud, family money, and my father's desperation. But I was the embarrassment. Sure, I slid one hand over my clutch, feeling the hard edge of the encrypted USB beneath the fabric. The final audit, the metadata, the signature, the receipts, all of it waited quietly under my fingertips. I smiled just enough for Arthur to notice. I wouldn't dream of ruining the deal. Dad. He studied me. Suspicious. I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice calm. I'm just here to watch the ink dry. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. That almost never happens unless you are excited, terrified, or have eaten gas station sushi. In my case, it was the first two. The final acquisition signing was scheduled for 10 in the morning at Apex Solutions headquarters. Arthur, Valerie, and Kendall were coming in expecting to walk out with an $80 million deal. A fresh crown for Kendall, and enough money to patch every hole Arthur had drilled into Crosstech's finances. They thought the ink was going to dry. Technically, they were right. Just not on the document they wanted. I dressed carefully. Not flashy. Not dramatic. No red lipstick revenge costume. Life is not a streaming series, and I had no interest in looking like I was there to perform. I wore a charcoal suit Apex had helped tailor for me under my contractor budget. Clean lines. Proper fit. Good shoes. The kind of outfit that did not ask permission to belong in a room. For 2 years, my family had kept me out of tech offices by turning my name into a warning label. That morning, I walked into Apex through the main entrance with a badge that opened the executive floor. Small joys matter. Laura Mercer met me outside the secure elevator. You ready? She asked. No. She looked at me over her glasses. I adjusted the binder in my arms. But the report is... That earned the faintest smile. That is the correct answer. The binder was thick, tabbed, indexed, and miserable to everyone who had lied. Inside were the audit findings, technical comparisons, chain of custody records, financial risk, memos, fabricated log evidence, metadata summaries, and the architecture signature report. The full evidence package was already preserved digitally by Apex Legal. The binder was partly practical and partly theater. Not cheap theater, courtroom theater. People believe screens can glitch. They believe files can be misunderstood. But a heavy binder placed on a conference table makes a special kind of sound. It tells liars that paper has arrived and brought friends. Harrison was already in the boardroom when I got there. The room was all glass walls, long table, polished metal, and silent screens waiting to ruin someone's morning. Apex's legal counsel sat along one side. Compliance sat beside them. 2 outside counsel representatives were present. 3 board members joined in person. Several more appeared on secure video. Nobody looked excited. That was good. Excited people make sloppy decisions. Harrison glanced at me. You will wait in the adjacent conference room until I call you in. I nodded. Arthur may attack you personally. I expect him to ting. Kendall may try to play confused. She won't have to try hard. Laura coughed once, which might have been a laugh trying to remain employed. Harrison's mouth twitched. Stay clinical. I will. No speeches unless necessary. I hate speeches. Josephine did too. No. Grandma loved speeches. She just believed only she should give them. That time, Harrison actually smiled. Then his expression settled. Whatever happens in there, do not let them drag you into the family version of the story. This is an audit. I know. But of course, I also knew it was more than that. For Apex, it was an acquisition risk. For regulators, it would become possible fraud. For Crosstech employees, it was pension exposure. For Kendall, it was the end of a fake genius act she had been wearing like a designer coat. For Arthur, it was a mirror he could not buy his way around. For me, it was the first room in 2 years where my work would speak louder than my father. At 9:52, I moved into the adjacent conference room. The screen inside showed a muted live feed of the boardroom. Legal wanted me to observe until called. Everything was being recorded under Apex's internal transaction protocol. Chain of custody. Again. Beautiful phrase. Very boring. Very powerful. At 10, exactly, Arthur Cross entered the boardroom like a man arriving to collect tribute. He wore a navy suit, silver tie, polished shoes, and that smooth CEO smile he used when he wanted people to forget contracts had details. Valerie came in beside him, elegant in cream, carrying a leather handbag and the serene expression of a woman who believed money was about to validate all her choices. Kendall walked in last. White suit, perfect hair, bright smile. No laptop. That detail told me plenty. A founder walking into an $80 million technical acquisition without her own working machine is either incredibly confident or incredibly decorative. Kendall was both, which was ambitious. Arthur shook Harrison's hand. Harrison, he said warmly. Big day. It is, Harrison replied. Valerie greeted the board members as if she had already rehearsed where everyone would stand in future photographs. Kendall thanked an assistant for coffee without looking at her face. Then Kendall noticed the stack of unsigned documents in the center of the table. Are those the final agreements? Some of them, Harrison said. Arthur sat down. I assume your team has completed the formalities. Formalities? That was what men like my father called other people's due diligence when they expected it to go their way. Harrison remained standing at the head of the table. Before anything is signed, our lead technical auditor will present the final due diligence report. Arthur's smile stayed in place, but it tightened. I thought that had been handled at the team level. It has, Harrison said. Now it comes to the board. Kendall leaned back. Annoyed. Is that really necessary? We have investor meetings lined up after this. Laura Mercer looked up from her notes. Yes, she said. It is necessary. Valerie gave a light laugh. I'm sure it's just procedure. Sweetheart. Arthur's eyes moved around the room. He noticed legal counsel. Compliance. Outside counsel. The recording indicator, for the first time, something in his expression shifted. Not fear. Calculation. He smelled trouble, but he had not found the source yet. Harrison pressed a button on the table. The door to my conference room unlocked. Please bring in the auditor, he said. I picked up the binder. For half a second, I stood still. Not because I was afraid to enter, because I wanted to remember the feeling before the door opened. The last quiet second before my father learned he had not buried me deep enough. Then I walked in, every head turned. Arthur's confident smile froze so completely I wondered if it required a software patch. Valerie made a small sound. Almost a gasp, but smaller. Like her manners tried to catch it and failed. Kendall blinked. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh my God," she said. "What is this?" I walked to the presentation station and placed the binder on the table. It landed with exactly the sound I had hoped for. Kendall looked at Harrison. Then back at me. "Is she bringing coffee?" Nobody laughed. That was when her smile started to weaken. Arthur stood slowly. "Harrison," he said. Voice controlled but sharp. "What is the meaning of this?" Harrison did not sit. "Miss Cross is not bringing coffee." Kendall's face flushed. Valerie looked between us. Confused in the way people become confused when consequences refuse to respect family hierarchy. Harrison continued. Clear and calm. "She is Apex Solutions' Chief Technical Auditor for this acquisition review." Arthur's eyes snapped to me. Chief Technical Auditor. There it was. Not warehouse IT. Not failed daughter. Not alleged thief. Not minimum wage assistant. The room received the title before my family could reject it. Kendall stood up. "That is impossible." I connected the secure presentation laptop to the boardroom screen. "It is not." Her mouth opened. Then closed. Arthur's voice dropped. "Delaney has a conflict of interest." Laura Mercer spoke before I could. "The conflict was disclosed to Apex Legal before engagement. Miss Cross's work has been independently verified by 3 internal reviewers and outside technical counsel." Arthur turned to Harrison. "She is unstable. She has a history of theft and professional misconduct." Harrison picked up the printed blacklist report from the table and held it loosely between 2 fingers. "Yes," he said. "We reviewed the statement your office circulated." Arthur's jaw tightened. "And?" he asked. "And," Harrison said. "That statement is now part of the evidentiary file." The silence that followed was excellent. Kendall looked suddenly less bored. Valerie put a hand to her throat. Arthur stared at Harrison. Then at me. And I could see the moment he understood this was not a misunderstanding, not a prank, not an emotional stunt he could crush with tone and reputation. This was a formal room, with formal records, and I was there, under authority he did not control. Harrison turned to the board. "Before this company signs any acquisition agreement, Miss Cross will present her final due diligence findings. Based on her report, this board will determine whether Apex proceeds, poses, or terminates the transaction." Kendall slammed her hand lightly on the table. "You cannot be serious. She is my sister." I looked at her. "That is the least relevant fact in this room." Her face went red. Arthur pointed at me. "This is personal revenge." "No," I said. "Opening the binder?" "Personal revenge would have been much faster and far less documented." Laura's pen paused again. I looked toward the board members. "Not my family. My name is Delaney Cross. For the purposes of this audit, my personal relationship to Lumascale leadership was disclosed, two-screened, and reviewed. Every technical finding I present today has been independently reproduced by Apex Solutions' technical due diligence team. Every financial risk finding has been reviewed by compliance. Every file has preserved hash values and access logs. I clicked the remote. The first slide appeared. Final technical due diligence report. Lumascale Analytics Acquisition Review. Kendall sank slowly back into her chair. Arthur remained standing. I looked at him once. Only once. Then I looked back at the screen. "Let's begin with the user metrics." I said it the way any auditor would say it. No raised voice. No shaking hands. No dramatic pause long enough for background music. Because this was not television. This was a boardroom. And boardrooms are where people ruin lives using charts, contracts, and very expensive pens. So, I used charts. The first slide showed Lumascale's reported user growth over the previous 12 months. It was beautiful. If you liked fraud with a clean color palette. The line rose smoothly every quarter. Active enterprise accounts increased. Daily sessions climbed. Data volume expanded exactly when investor meetings required it to expand. A board member leaned forward. "These are the figures provided in the acquisition packet?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "These are the reported numbers submitted by Lumascale Analytics and certified by Crosstech Consulting as strategic advisor." Arthur shifted in his seat. "Good." The next slide appeared. "This is what the back-end environment shows." The second chart was less pretty. Real active usage dropped sharply once internal test accounts, demo environments, duplicate accounts, and simulated sessions were removed. The room went still in that very corporate way where nobody gasps. But everyone suddenly becomes more interested in their pens. I pointed to the first column. Lumascale reported 146 active enterprise accounts. The audit confirms 21 accounts with verified independent customer activity. Kendall snapped. That is wrong. I did not look at her. The audit confirms 21 accounts with verified independent customer activity. I repeated. And 6 of those accounts are trial environments with no signed long-term contracts. Arthur leaned back in his chair. This is a misunderstanding of how SaaS adoption works. I clicked to the next slide. This is a session map by source. The screen displayed clusters of activity. Real users behave inconsistently. They log in at odd times. They leave sessions open. They make errors. They repeat tasks. They abandon workflows. Lumascale's reported activity shows repeated login intervals, identical session durations, and patterned API calls that do not match organic enterprise behavior. Laura Mercer added calmly. The pattern was reproduced by 2 independent reviewers. Kendall looked at Harrison. You're letting her do this? Harrison did not answer her. That was probably healthier for everyone. I moved to the next slide. These user sessions were generated from internal ranges tied to Lumascale-controlled infrastructure. In several cases, the same internal test traffic was relabeled as 3 separate customer environments. A board member frowned. So the growth numbers were inflated. Yes. Arthur's voice sharpened. Allegedly. I clicked again. The screen displayed access logs with timestamps, administrative IDs, and export records. Documented. I said. That word landed better than any insult could have. Arthur stared at the screen. I could see him working, calculating, searching for a door. He was very good at finding exits in conversations. But technical records are rude that way. They do not care who raised you. Kendall crossed her arms. Even if some accounts were categorized wrong, that does not affect the product. Correct, I said. Which brings us to the product. Her mouth closed. The room seemed to tighten. I changed slides. A clean architecture diagram appeared on the boardroom screen. It showed Lumascale's core anomaly engine, data ingestion layer, processing pipeline, and predictive output module. This is the architecture Lumascale presented as proprietary. Kendall lifted her chin. Yes, she said. My architecture. I let that sit for 1 second. Just one. Then I clicked. The next diagram appeared beside it. Meridian, my college project, same foundation, same dependency flow, same anomaly engine, same structural decisions. Different labels, a few variables renamed, some comments stripped, but the bones were standing in full view. I heard Valerie whisper. Oh, no. That was the first honest thing she had said all day. Arthur looked at her sharply. I continued. The architecture on the left is Lumascale's current production system. The architecture on the right is Meridian, a distributed anomaly detection system I authored 4 years ago while completing my senior software engineering project. Kendall stood again. That is a lie. I turned to her for the first time. No. Kendall. It is a comparison. Her face twisted. You are obsessed with me. You always have been. You cannot stand that I succeeded. That was familiar ground. The family version of the story. Jealous Delaney. Bitter Delaney. Difficult Delaney. Unstable Delaney. I looked back at the board. Not her. Slide 22 includes structural overlap analysis. Core anomaly engine match rate. 91%. Overall architecture overlap. 78%. Independent review confirmed the match using source decomposition, dependency tracing, and function-level comparison. Arthur slapped his palm on the table. This is outrageous. Delaney was removed from Crosstech for theft. She had access to protected materials and attempted to claim them as her own. There it was, his favorite knife. He had used it in private dinners, executive channels, HR warnings, and quiet conversations behind closed doors. Now he used it in a room full of lawyers, auditors, executives, recordings, and one daughter who had finally brought receipts. Harrison spoke before I did. Arthur, you will have time to respond after the presentation. I am responding now. Laura Mercer looked at him. Interruptions are being recorded. That helped. Arthur sat back. Furious. I clicked to the next slide. Mr. Rest. Cross's statement depends on one claim, that Crosstech owned the original architecture before I did. The screen changed to metadata, raw timestamps, repository creation records, local machine identifiers, original author logs, initial commit history. My name appeared cleanly in the records. Delaney Cross, initial commit, primary architect, original author. I did not need to explain much. Good evidence knows how to introduce itself. This repository was created on my personal machine before any Crosstech filing related to this architecture. The original hash records match my offline backup. The Crosstech transfer document naming Kendall Cross as owner was created later. Then backdated. An outside counsel representative leaned toward the table microphone. Can the backdating be confirmed? Yes, I said. The file creation timestamp, editing history, internal document ID sequence, and server-side archive record do not match the stated execution date. Laura added. Apex Legal has preserved copies for review. Arthur's face had gone pale, but his voice stayed controlled. You are presenting stolen data from a private family company. No, I said. I am presenting evidence submitted through lawful acquisition due diligence, supported by records provided under review and by an independent archive created before the transaction. He narrowed his eyes. Josephine? I did not answer. I did not have to. For the first time, his expression changed in a way that looked almost human. Not guilt, recognition. He realized Grandma Josephine had not trusted him either. That must have stung. Kendall pointed at the screen. Metadata can be faked. Yes, I said. That is why metadata alone is not the final proof. I clicked again. The slide changed to a code view. A specific section appeared, enlarged and highlighted. Line 402. I heard Arthur inhale. Not much. Enough. Kendall frowned at the screen. She did not recognize it. Of course she did not. She had never understood the architecture deeply enough to know what she had stolen. She knew the pitch deck. She knew the founder story. She knew how to stand on stage and say innovation with nice teeth. But code does not care about nice teeth. This is a latent diagnostic pathway embedded in the foundational architecture. I said. It is not visible during standard feature review. It does not affect normal performance. It exists inside the underlying validation structure. A board member asked, a watermark? More durable than a watermark? I said. A structural signature. I looked at Kendall. You did not even read the architecture you stole. Her face flushed. Line 402 is a latent signature Grandma Josephine helped me build. It reads, authored by Delaney Cross. The room was silent. I zoomed in. There it was. Not a comment. Not a label. Not some decorative mark that could be dismissed. A signature woven into the diagnostic logic beneath the system. I clicked again. The next screen showed the same signature extracted from Lumascale's current production code. Authored by Delaney Cross. Same pathway. Same structure. Same hidden foundation. I turned to the board. This signature exists in my original Meridian architecture and in Lumascale's production system. It could not have been added after the fact without altering the dependency structure, which would have created detectable changes across the build history. Those changes do not exist. Kendall shook her head. I did not know. Arthur turned toward her sharply. That was the wrong reaction. Everyone saw it. If Kendall had built the system, Arthur would have looked confused or offended. Instead, he looked like a man whose employee had just said the quiet part near a microphone. I clicked to the next slide. This acquisition packet represents Lumascale's product as original proprietary technology. The evidence shows the core architecture was authored by me, transferred through a backdated internal filing, and represented to Apex as Kendall Cross's work. I paused. Not for drama, for clarity, which means Lumascale is attempting to sell Apex stolen intellectual property. Arthur stood. Enough. I looked at him. No, not yet. His face hardened. You have no idea what you are doing. I know exactly what I am doing. You think this room will protect you? This room is not protecting me. I said. The evidence is... That landed. I could see it in the board members' faces. In Laura's stillness. In Harrison's quiet focus, for 2 years, Arthur had controlled the narrative because he controlled the rooms. This was the first room where he did not. I moved to the final section. Now we move from intellectual property theft to acquisition risk. Valerie's eyes filled with tears. Not for me. Not for what had been stolen. For the deal. I almost admired the consistency. The screen changed to financial exposure. LumaScale's inflated user metrics were included in acquisition materials transmitted to Apex across state lines. Those materials were also used in investor communications for a pending $50 million round. Crosstech Consulting certified strategic support while carrying undisclosed financial exposure tied to the acquisition outcome. Arthur's jaw clenched. I continued. Those facts create potential wire fraud concerns. Securities exposure. And mandatory reporting obligations depending on counsel's final review. Kendall sat down hard. The room absorbed the words. Wire fraud. Securities exposure. Mandatory reporting. Those were not family dinner words. They were federal words. Expensive words. Words that made rich men suddenly interested in settlement language. Harrison finally spoke. Miss Cross. What is your recommendation? I looked at the final slide, then at the board. Terminate the acquisition pending legal review. Preserve all communications, access logs, and transaction materials. Notify appropriate regulatory authorities as advised by counsel. Arthur stared at me with pure hatred. Kendall looked like the floor had disappeared. Valerie was crying silently now, which would have moved me if she had not spent 2 years helping bury the daughter who was standing 5 feet away from her. Harrison nodded once. Thank you. Miss Cross. I closed the binder. The sound was soft, final. And for the first time since I was 24, the word thief no longer belonged to me. The silence after that was not empty. It was full of people recalculating their futures. I had seen rooms go quiet before. Family dinners after I asked the wrong question. Interviews after someone checked my last name. Warehouse offices when a server crashed and everybody suddenly remembered IT existed. But this was different. This was the silence of very expensive confidence losing power. Arthur was the first one to move. Of course he was. Men like my father do not sit with consequences. They try to manage them. This is absurd, he said. But the strength had gone out of his voice. Harrison, you and I both know these things can be negotiated. Harrison looked at him like Arthur had just offered to negotiate gravity. No. Arthur gave a tight laugh. Come on. We are business people. If there are concerns, we address them. We adjust the price. We carve out liabilities. We restructure the deal. Kendall turned on him so fast her chair scraped the floor. Restructure, she said. Dad, what is she talking about? Arthur did not look at her. That was answer enough. Kendall's face changed. I had seen her annoyed, smug, bored, and fake sweet. I had never seen her scared in a way she could not dress up. You told me the code was clean, she said. Arthur's jaw tightened. This is not the place. No. This is exactly the place. Her voice rose. You told me Crosstech owned the architecture. You told me Delaney had tried to steal it from us. Several people at the table looked down at their notes. That was the problem with public lies. Once they crack, everybody starts checking where the pieces land. Valerie reached for Kendall's arm. Sweetheart, calm down. Kendall pulled away. Don't tell me to calm down. I am the founder on every document. I almost said something. I did not. Kendall had enjoyed the crown while it was heavy with praise. Now she was discovering crowns can become evidence. Arthur finally turned to her. Stop talking. It was sharp, cold, and ugly. The kind of voice he usually saved for me. Kendall went still. For one brief second, I wondered if she finally understood what it felt like to be on the wrong side of his protection. Then she looked at me with panic and hatred mixed together. You did this. No, I said. You signed things you did not understand. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. That was new. Harrison stood at the head of the table. Apex Solutions is terminating acquisition discussions effective immediately. Arthur's face hardened. You cannot do that. We can. We are. You will be hearing from our attorneys. Laura Mercer spoke without lifting her voice. Mr. Cross. Outside counsel is already preserving all communications related to the transaction, Any litigation you initiate will expand discovery. That sentence was polite, professional, and devastating. Arthur understood it. Discovery meant emails, drafts, Slack messages, transfer documents, internal memos, calendar invites. Everything he had ever assumed would stay behind company walls. He sat down slowly. The navy suit still looked expensive. The man inside it suddenly looked older. Harrison continued. Given the findings presented today, Apex has legal obligations to preserve records and report potential intellectual property theft, misrepresentation in acquisition materials, and possible wire fraud. Arthur's hands curled on the table. Potential, he said. That word matters. It does, Harrison replied. That is why regulators will review the evidence, Kendall whispered. Regulators? Nobody answered her quickly enough. That scared her more. Laura turned one page in her folder. Representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission have already been notified that Apex is preserving materials related to a potentially fraudulent acquisition packet. Additional referrals will be determined by counsel. Valerie made a small choking sound. The SEC. That was not a family problem. That was not a, let's discuss this after dinner problem. That was a federal agency with subpoena power and no interest in Valerie's ability to make Thanksgiving place cards. Arthur looked at Harrison. You called them before this meeting? Harrison's expression did not change. We notified counsel before this meeting. Counsel notified the appropriate contacts once the evidence reached the reporting threshold. Arthur's eyes flicked to me. There was murder in them. Not the bloody kind. The social kind. The financial kind. The career kind. The kind he had already tried once. But this time, the room had changed. The witnesses had changed. The record had changed. And I had changed. You ungrateful little Arthur, Laura said. One word. That was all. Outside counsel looked up. The recording light kept blinking. Arthur swallowed the rest of his sentence like it had cut him on the way down. Good. Apex Legal began outlining next steps. Termination of transaction. Preservation notice. Restricted communication protocol. No destruction of records. No direct contact with Apex employees outside counsel channels. No public statements misrepresenting Apex's findings. Each sentence locked another door. Kendall started crying when they mentioned public statements. Not sobbing. Not yet. Just those quiet, furious tears of someone used to being rescued before consequences reached the carpet. Valerie slid her chair back and walked toward me. That was the first time I felt real danger in the room. Not physical danger. Mother danger. The kind wrapped in perfume, guilt, and memory. Delaney, she said softly. I turned to her. She reached for my hand. I moved it away before she touched me. Her face crumpled. Just enough for an audience. Please, she whispered. You have made your point. My point. 2 years of poverty. Humiliation. Lost interviews. Sleepless nights. And a stolen career had become a point. Like I had been arguing over seating arrangements. I have not made a point, I said. I presented an audit. Her eyes filled. This is your family. There it was. The emergency exit every guilty relative tries when the building catches fire. Family. When they needed loyalty. I was family. When they needed a scapegoat. I was unstable. When they needed silence. I was difficult. When they needed the truth buried. I was a thief. Funny how family kept changing jobs depending on who was paying. Valerie lowered her voice. Your father made mistakes. Arthur looked away. That was almost funny. Even now. She was trying to convert fraud into a parenting style. Mistakes? I said. She nodded quickly. Yes. Terrible mistakes. But he was trying to protect the company. To protect Kendall. You know how much pressure he has been under. I looked at my mother. And for a second, I saw her at every dinner table where she could have stopped him. Every phone call where she could have asked why I was working nights. Every moment she could have chosen one honest sentence and did not. You knew, I said. Her lips parted. That was enough. You knew he was telling people I stole from Crosstech. Delaney, you knew I could not get hired. Her voice broke. I thought if you came home, if you accepted help, maybe we could fix things privately. I almost smiled. Privately. That word had done a lot of work in my family. Arthur handled accusations privately. Valerie wanted forgiveness privately. Kendall enjoyed public praise from private theft. No, I said. You thought if I got desperate enough, I would accept a little job under Kendall and be grateful for the cage. Valerie started crying harder. I am your mother. Yes, I said. That made it worse. The room was quiet again. Kendall wiped at her face. Are you happy now? I looked at her. No. That seemed to confuse her. Good. I am not happy. I am accurate. Arthur leaned forward. Delaney, listen to me. We can still contain this. No. You do not understand what happens if this gets out. Crosstech will lose clients. Employees will panic. People could lose their jobs. That finally made me angry. Not loud, angry, clear, angry. You leveraged their pension exposure to support Kendall's valuation. Arthur's face went still. Kendall turned toward him again. What? Valerie covered her mouth. I looked at the board, then at Harrison. This section is documented in the financial risk memo attached to the audit. Crosstech employee retirement reserves appear indirectly exposed through an internal loan structure tied to acquisition proceeds. One of the board members cursed under his breath. Arthur snapped. You had no right to review that. Harrison answered. You tied Crosstech support to the acquisition materials. You opened the door. Arthur looked like he wanted to deny it, but denial had become expensive. Kendall stood again, shaking. You put the company pension at risk? Arthur's silence answered. For the first time, Kendall looked less like a villain and more like someone who had spent her whole life being handed matches and told they were candles. That did not excuse her. It just explained why she had burned so much without looking down. Valerie turned back to me, desperate now. Delaney, please. We can talk as a family. We can go home. We can sit down. Your father can apologize. Arthur flinched at that, which told me exactly how sincere the apology would be. I closed the binder and held it against my chest. You spent 2 years telling the world I was a criminal, so you could build a throne for Kendall. Valerie sobbed once. I kept my voice even. I did not destroy your family. Mom, I just provided the receipts. No one spoke. Not Kendall, not Arthur, not Valerie. The sentence did what truth does when it finally enters a room with nowhere to hide. It ended the performance. Harrison turned to counsel. Proceed with termination notices. Laura gathered the documents. The board members began speaking in low voices. Arthur sat frozen, staring at the table like he could still find a way to rewrite what had already been recorded. Valerie backed away from me slowly, as if I had become someone she did not recognize. She was right. The daughter she recognized had spent years trying to be believed by people committed to misunderstanding her. That daughter was gone. I picked up my bag and stepped away from the table. Kendall whispered my name. I looked back. For 1 second, I thought she might apologize. Not enough to fix anything. Not enough to erase what she had done. But something human. Instead, she said, what am I supposed to do now? And there it was. The center of Kendall Cross. Not remorse. Panic over inconvenience. I gave her the only honest answer I had. Learn to build something that belongs to you. Then I walked out of the boardroom before my family could ask me to carry the wreckage they had created. The hallway outside the boardroom felt colder than it had before. Maybe it was the air conditioning. Maybe it was the fact that I had just watched my family empire get unplugged in real time. Either way, I kept walking. I did not run. I did not cry. I did not turn around to see if anyone followed me. That part surprised me. For years, some small, stubborn piece of me had waited for one of them to come after me. My mother, maybe. My father, never. Kendall, only if she needed something. But still, some foolish part of me had believed that if the truth ever came out, someone would finally say the words I had needed. We were wrong. We hurt you. You did not deserve it. But nobody came down that hallway. And maybe that was the final answer. Laura Mercer caught up with me near the elevator. Delaney? I stopped. She studied my face with the careful expression of a woman who had seen plenty of professional disasters and a few personal ones pretending to be business meetings. You did well in there. I did my job. Yes, she said. That is what I mean. The elevator doors opened. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she said, Legal will handle communications from here. Do not speak to your family without counsel present. That will not be difficult. Her mouth tightened. Almost a smile. Harrison wants to meet with you later this afternoon. But only if you are up for it. I am. Are you sure? No, I said. But I am still coming. That made her smile for real. The next few days were not dramatic in the way people imagine. There was no thunderstorm. No public screaming match in a parking lot. No one fainted into a decorative plant. Though I admit that would have added variety. Instead, the collapse came through emails. Notices. Account freezes. Conference calls. And lawyers, using very calm voices to say very expensive things. Apex terminated the acquisition. That happened first. The $80 million deal disappeared with one formal notice and a long attachment list. Lumascale's pending investor round froze almost immediately. Nobody wanted to pour money into a company whose core product had a glowing red question mark over authorship, metrics, and federal exposure. Investors are brave when the chart goes up. They are less brave when counsel says subpoena. Crosstech's clients started calling within 48 hours. Then they started leaving. Not all at once. Companies rarely slam doors when contracts are involved. They pause engagements. They reassess vendor risk. They transition critical services. Corporate language is funny that way. A firm can be bleeding from 3 places and still describe it as a strategic realignment. By the end of the first week, 2 major clients had suspended work with Crosstech. By the end of the second, a bank had begun reviewing the loans Arthur had tied to Lumascale's valuation. By the third, the story was no longer private enough for my mother's favorite word. Federal investigators had requested records. The SEC review became formal. Crosstech's internal pension exposure triggered employee panic. As it should have. People had worked there for years. Some had planned retirement around the idea that the company leadership was at least mildly honest. Which, in hindsight, was optimistic. I felt terrible for them. That is the part revenge stories often skip. When a corrupt person falls, they rarely land alone. They drag innocent people toward the edge because they spent years building their throne on someone else's floor. Harrison arranged for Apex to extend interview opportunities to several Crosstech engineers and operations staff whose work had no connection to Arthur's fraud. Quietly. Carefully. No grand announcement. No press release. I respected him for that. Grandma Josephine would have too. Though she would have said his offer letter template needed work. Kendall's fall was faster. Tech media did not need much encouragement once the acquisition cancellation became public. Lumascale's young visionary founder's story collapsed under the weight of basic questions. She could not explain the architecture. She could not defend the user metrics. She could not produce clean ownership records. For years, my sister had been praised for standing in front of work she did not build. Now she had to stand in front of questions she could not answer. Her social circle thinned out first. That is usually how you know money people smell smoke. Invitations slowed. Calls went unanswered. The same women who once commented heart emojis under her founder photos suddenly developed demanding schedules and private wellness retreats. The industry did not forgive her. Not because the industry is moral. Let's not get carried away. The industry forgives plenty when the stock price behaves. It did not forgive her because she had become risky. There is a difference. Arthur tried to call me on the 4th day, then again on the 5th, then from an unknown number, then through Valerie, then through an attorney whose voicemail was so stiff it could have stood upright by itself. I saved everything and forwarded it to Laura. I did not answer. Not once. That was harder than I expected. Not because I wanted to speak to him. Because a lifetime of training does not disappear just because you finally win one room. When your father calls, some old part of your nervous system still thinks you are in trouble. Still thinks you must explain. Still thinks you must earn the right to hang up. So I practiced doing nothing. Doing nothing can be a skill, especially when people are used to making you react. About a month after the boardroom meeting, Harrison called me into his office. This time, I did not sit across from him as a desperate woman carrying a USB and a ruined reputation. I sat there as a technical auditor whose report had saved Apex from buying stolen property and inheriting a legal disaster wearing a startup hoodie. He slid a folder across the desk. My first thought was, please let this not be another secret dead relative package. I had reached my annual limit. It is an offer, he said. I opened it. full-time position. Senior Director of Technical Integrity. Apex Solutions. Salary. Equity. Benefits. Office. Staff. Independent reporting line to compliance and executive leadership. I read it twice. Not because I did not understand, because the woman who had reset forklift tablets at 3 in the morning needed a minute to catch up. You are offering me a department, I said. I am offering you the authority to build one. Because of the audit? Because of how you conducted the audit. I looked up. He continued. You had every reason to make it personal. You did not. You built a case that could survive anger, bias, and legal attack. That is rare. I closed the folder gently. For 2 years, my father had told the world I could not be trusted. Now someone was handing me trust with a budget. That was not a small thing. I accept, I said. Harrison nodded. Josephine would be insufferably proud. I laughed. The laugh surprised me. It did not sound bitter. It sounded like air coming back into a room. My new office was on the corner of the 32nd floor. I tried to tell Harrison I did not need a corner office. He told me the position came with one. Laura told me to stop negotiating against myself. Which was fair. Older women in glasses have a special way of making common sense sound like a court order. The first day I moved in, I brought 3 things. My laptop, Grandma Josephine's old ledger, locked in a secure cabinet, and a framed photograph of her. In the picture, she was sitting at her desk, looking slightly annoyed at whoever held the camera. That was the most accurate image of her I owned. I placed it beside my monitors. Hope this meets your standards, I said quietly. In my head, I heard her answer. Barely. That would have made me cry if I had let it. Instead, I opened a fresh repository and started writing new code. Not Meridian, not something stolen, reclaimed, or repaired. Something new. That mattered. A lot of people think justice means getting back what was taken. Sometimes it does. But sometimes the deeper justice is building again without asking the thieves for permission. My phone rang just after lunch. Unknown number. I knew before I checked the voicemail. Arthur. I watched the screen until it stopped ringing. Then I blocked the contact. No speech. No final confrontation. No dramatic line that would have sounded good in a trailer. Just one thumb tap. Blocked. It felt almost too small for everything he had done. Then it felt perfect. Because peace is usually not loud. It does not kick down the door. It closes one. I turned back to my monitors. There were emails waiting. Meetings to schedule. A team to build. Policies to draft. Systems to protect. Younger engineers to mentor so they would never hand their best work to the wrong person without proof of ownership. That became one of my rules. Document your work. Keep copies. Read what you sign. Do not confuse family approval with safety. And never assume someone loves you enough not to use your silence. My father lost the story because he thought reputation was louder than evidence. My sister lost the crown because she wore it without earning it. My mother lost access to me because she chose comfort over truth and called it love. And me? I did not get my old life back. Thank God. That life was too small. Too hungry. And too full of people who wanted me grateful for crumbs from a table I helped build. I got something better. A clean name. A locked door. A new office. Work that belonged to me. And a quiet life where the phone could ring without me answering to anyone who had mistaken my patience for weakness. That is the lesson I wish someone had told me earlier. Especially for anyone listening who has spent years being called difficult, ungrateful, I am bitter, or dramatic by people who benefited from your silence. You do not have to scream to defend yourself. You do not have to become cruel to become free. But you do need proof. You need boundaries. You need to stop handing people private access to your life just because they share your last name. Family can be a blessing. Family can also be the place where people learn exactly which buttons to press because they helped install them. So protect your work, protect your peace, protect your name. And when the truth finally gives you a door out, do not stand there waiting for the people who hurt you to clap. Walk through it, close it behind you, then build something they cannot steal. The lesson from Delaney's story is not just about revenge. It is about learning that silence, patience, and love should never be used as permission for someone to erase your name. Family can be precious. But family does not have the right to lie about you, steal from you, or make you feel small so they can feel powerful. When people twist the truth, the best answer is not always shouting. Sometimes the strongest answer is documentation, calm action, and clear boundaries. Many older viewers know this pain well. You may have spent years keeping peace, forgiving too quickly, or staying quiet because you did not want to cause trouble. But protecting your reputation, your work, your home, and your dignity is not causing trouble. It is self-respect. Delaney won because she did not become cruel. She became prepared. She kept proof. She waited for the right room, the right people, and the right moment. That is a powerful reminder. Truth needs courage, but it also needs patience. In real life, do not let guilt replace good judgment. Love your family, but protect your peace. Forgiveness should never require you to hand someone the same knife twice.